A single drop of crimson reduction hit the pristine white crystal banquet table. Instead of soaking in, the liquid sizzled, rapidly boiling until it hardened into a toxic black ash. Beneath the high-vaulted ceilings of Etheria 4, the sudden hiss of reacting chemicals was the only sound. You'll want to hear exactly how a single plate of Terran food shattered an empire. Trust me on that. 3 hours earlier, the greatest threat to the galaxy had been a slightly over-reduced tomato sauce. In the cramped galley of the Vanguard, Chef Bastien Roux ignored the shimmering beauty of the crystalline docks outside. He focused entirely on the silver 3-pronged fork in his hand, polishing the tines until they gleamed like a mirror. Bastien refused to touch the local prismary utensils, claiming their vibrating harmonic edges ruined the mouthfeel of real grain. He set the fork down with a sharp, rhythmic click. "The prismary protocol requires us to be at the table in 10 minutes, Bastien," Captain Kalen Thorne said, leaning against the bulkhead. His voice carried the weary weight of a man who had spent too many months in the void. Kalen adjusted the stiff, uncomfortable cuffs of his dress uniform, his fingers tugging at the high collar that seemed designed to choke him. He watched the chef with a quiet, observant intensity, noted the way Bastien's hands trembled slightly, and then looked away. To the prismary observers, Kalen appeared the image of human submission, his stillness misinterpreted as a dullness of a lesser species. "High Archon Vaxus is waiting," Kalen added, checking his chronometer, "and Princess Nixia doesn't have much time left." Across the white docks drifted the last of the supply crates. The prismary were a species of living light in rigid geometry, their bodies humming with a constant, low-frequency bioluminescence. But that glow was fading. Princess Nixia was starving, her internal systems failing as her body rejected every local synthesized nutrient. To the prismary, the Terran marrowgrain was a parasitic alien contaminant, a primitive sludge from a dirt world. Yet, it was the only substance with a specific DNA rewriting density required to jumpstart her crystalline metabolism. By the planetary guard, the human delegation was escorted through halls of singing glass. Bastien carried the covered silver platter as if it were a thermal detonator. Every prismary they passed rippled with a dull, charcoal-gray vibration, a sign of deep biological distress and simmering xenophobia. They saw the humans not as saviors, but as a necessary filth. "Just remember the plan," Kalen whispered, his eyes scanning the ornate banquet hall. "We serve, she eats, we leave with a trade agreement." The hall was a cathedral of frozen light. Prime Minister Malika stood at the head of the table, his own bioluminescence a sharp, aggressive violet. He watched with a curled lip as Bastien placed the marrowgrain before the princess. Nixia looked skeletal, her skin the color of old smoke. Bastien reached out, his movements clinical and precise, and placed a silver fork into her weak, shaking hand. "A simple recipe for a complicated species," Bastien muttered, stepping back. Nixia took the first bite. The effect was immediate. From her core, a soft amber pulse began to radiate, pushed outward by the nutrient synthesis of the grain. The gray retreated. Her crystalline skin began to hum with a vibrant, healthy resonance that filled the room. For a moment, the tension broke. Then Malika stepped forward. "The contaminant is working," he announced, his voice echoing like breaking glass. "But at what cost to our purity?" Kalen remained silent. He didn't defend the food or the human contribution. He simply watched the princess, his mind calculating the time until their departure. He missed his ship. He missed the smell of recycled air and the hum of engines that didn't try to sing to him. The Alliance Gala was supposed to be a triumph. Instead, it felt like a trap. Kalen noticed a tiny, almost invisible flicker in the princess's amber glow. It was a stutter in the light, a rhythmic shivering that didn't match the marrowgrain profile. He glanced at Malika, whose violet light had turned into a dark, bruised purple. The pulse of amber light within Princess Nixia grew stronger, casting long, geometric shadows across the crystalline table. Chef Bastien leaned in, his eyes darting to the silver 3-pronged fork as the princess lifted it for a third time. On the polished metal, a faint, sickly iridescent smear appeared where the silver touched the crimson reduction. Bastien's earlier obsession with polishing the fork hadn't been pride. He had been looking for the tarnish that only silver reveals in the presence of heavy metal neurotoxins. Between the rows of singing glass marched the planetary guard, their violet armor humming with lethal intent. Malika's violet light flared into a jagged, angry corona as he watched the humans. Kalen checked the battery percentage on his wristcom, a habitual glance at a routine number. Then, the glow shattered. Princess Nixia collapsed onto the banquet table, her glowing skin turning a deathly, opaque charcoal gray. Black ash bubbled from the remains of the meal. Malika's shaking finger pointed directly at the humans, his voice a jagged screech that tore through the hall. "Arrest them!" the Prime Minister roared. "The humans have murdered our future." The human captain, the guards surrounded immediately. Kalen Thorne did not reach for a weapon, nor did he plead for mercy. He simply stood with his head bowed, his eyes focused on the floor in a posture of utter defeat. To Malika, this was the expected brokenness of a lesser species facing its end. In reality, Kalen's eyelids were fluttering in a precise, rapid rhythm, his neural link comms translating his blinks into a high-level override command for the planet's emergency network. Deadstone. Absolute silence. Suddenly, every crystalline screen on Etheria 4 flickered and died, replaced by a flickering ledger of shadow accounts and a recorded conversation from Malika's private chambers. The evidence of the Prime Minister's embezzlement and his secret purchase of the very toxins now killing the princess was viewed by every citizen simultaneously. It was the data Sora had pulled from the palace servers while the humans played their role at the banquet. Malika's violet light dimmed to a sickly, mottled gray as the planetary guard turned their weapons toward him. Rose from the crowd a roar of indignation that shook the glass foundations of the palace. Kalen moved then, pushing past confused guards to reach the princess. He watched her charcoal gray hand weakly clench, her thumb tucking into her palm in the exact reflex his 6-year-old niece made when her fever spiked. It was the only thing that kept his hand steady as he nodded to Dr. Solis, who began the urgent work of DNA neutralization. The palace balcony overlooked a world in transition. Under the watchful eyes of the new Prismary Council, Malika was led away in light shackles. The Empire was built on crystal, but its survival now depended on the red soil of a distant world. A single silver fork rested on the velvet nightstand. Its tines caught the amber light of the rising sun. Below the balcony, the docks of Etheria 4 were no longer white. They were stained with the rich, red dust of the first Terran shipment. A soft amber glow filled the room.